They arrogantly thought she was incredibly weak. They thought she was completely, utterly broken. But when a ruthless millionaire casually drives his brand-new girlfriend to work, only to look out his window and see the exact wife he maliciously threw out into the street, now holding a child and linking arms with an untouchable billionaire, his entire universe violently stops. Traffic on Fifth Avenue in the absolute heart of Manhattan was moving at its usual, frantic weekday rhythm. Inside his gleaming, pristine black Mercedes Maybach, Mark Sterling offered a highly arrogant smile to the beautiful young woman sitting in the passenger seat. "I will see you at dinner, baby. The massive investor meeting today is going to be incredibly long." He leaned over and gave her a quick, aggressive kiss, a physical gesture that contained significantly more toxic possession than actual, genuine tenderness. The young woman, his brand-new girlfriend, smiled back, her eyes completely filled with raw ambition, and gracefully stepped out of the luxury car. She walked purposefully toward the towering glass entrance of one of the absolute most imposing skyscrapers in the financial district, where her elite advertising agency was located. Mark waited patiently for her to pass through the heavy revolving doors before smoothly shifting the car into gear to continue his drive. And in that exact, terrifying microsecond, his entire world violently stopped spinning. Emerging from the exact same heavy glass doors his girlfriend had just entered, another figure confidently appeared. It was a woman of absolute serene elegance, wearing a flawlessly tailored designer suit that silently, powerfully, screamed of massive success and unbreakable confidence. Walking intimately beside her was an incredibly tall, handsome man with a towering, authoritative posture who was fiercely, protectively holding her hand. And resting comfortably in her arms, securely nestled against her chest, was a little boy with thick chestnut curls, observing the busy world with massive, curious eyes. A freezing, terrifying chill violently sprinted down Mark's spine. He slammed on his brakes so incredibly hard that the luxury SUV behind him blared its horn in aggressive protest. He absolutely didn't hear it. His eyes were entirely, violently glued to the woman. Time physically seemed to compress, and for one terrifying second, he was absolutely no longer in Manhattan in 2025. He was violently transported back to his sprawling Tribeca penthouse exactly 2 years ago. The woman was Lauren, his discarded ex-wife. The man walking intimately beside her was unmistakably Elias Thorne, a massive, untouchable billionaire titan in global logistics, whose endless wealth and absolute power made Mark's own millions look exactly like pathetic pocket change. But what truly, violently knocked the oxygen completely out of his burning lungs was the child. A little boy. A boy who was exactly, mathematically, the right age. All the blood violently drained from Mark's handsome face. His hands aggressively gripped the leather steering wheel with such terrifying force that his knuckles painfully throbbed. The woman he had ruthlessly thrown away, exactly like garbage. The woman who he arrogantly imagined had found a pathetic refuge in some crumbling, forgotten neighborhood in Queens to live an anonymous, miserable life, was standing right there, radiant, powerful, intimately connected to one of the absolute most influential men in the entire city, and fiercely holding a child that should have been his biological son. Lauren confidently walked mere feet away from his idling car, entirely absorbed in a warm, highly animated conversation with Elias. Her beautiful eyes didn't cross paths with his for even a single microsecond. To her, he was completely, utterly invisible. Just another random, pathetic car trapped in city traffic. But to him, in that agonizing moment, she was the absolute, living embodiment of his greatest, most catastrophic mistake. A terrifying ghost violently rising from the dead, past to aggressively collect a massive debt he didn't even realize he owed. The horrifying question physically struck him with the brutal force of a sledgehammer. What the hell have I done? Part 1. The betrayal and the vow. The agonizing memory of that specific day, exactly 2 years ago, violently washed over him with the aggressive fury of a tidal wave. The warm afternoon sun had been heavily flooding the massive Tribeca penthouse. The breathtaking view of the Hudson River stretched endlessly to the horizon, a landscape of pure peace that violently, brutally contrasted with the toxic, silent war currently waging in his living room. Lauren was waiting for him, sitting rigidly on the expensive white linen sofa, her hands aggressively clasped together in her lap in a desperate attempt to completely hide her violent trembling. She had literally just returned from the elite OBGYN. A tiny, crisp white envelope was secretly tucked deep inside her designer purse. Inside it rested a blurry black and white ultrasound image of their future. "Mark, I urgently need to talk to you," she had said. Her voice was incredibly quiet, but it carried a desperate urgency that he arrogantly chose to completely ignore. He was standing causally by the massive, glass-enclosed wine cellar, meticulously selecting a $500 bottle of vintage Bordeaux for a corporate dinner that she was explicitly not invited to. "Not right now, Lauren. I am incredibly busy." "It is massively important," she fiercely insisted, slowly standing up. "I am pregnant." The heavy words hung violently suspended in the dead air. Lauren stared intensely at him, her heart frantically hammering in a terrifying mixture of deep fear and desperate hope. She desperately craved a warm smile, a fierce embrace, a tiny glimpse of the loving man she had originally married. Instead, he slowly, coldly placed the expensive bottle of wine exactly back into its rack with a dry, highly final thud. The absolute, suffocating silence that followed was infinitely sharper than any violent scream. When he finally, slowly turned to face her, his handsome face was a terrifying mask of pure, absolute ice. "That absolutely does not fit into my corporate plans right now." "Our plans," she gently corrected, her voice violently cracking. "We are a team, Mark." "Teams frequently disband," he countered ruthlessly, aggressively walking over to the marble-wet bar to pour himself a massive glass of neat whiskey. "And our pathetic marriage is officially ending right here. I met someone else. She is incredibly young. She is massively ambitious. She possesses absolutely zero baggage. In the massive elite life I intend to aggressively build starting today, there is absolutely zero room for a screaming child." The disgusting word baggage violently, deeply lacerated her soul. Her innocent child, the beautiful product of a love she had foolishly believed in, instantly, maliciously reduced to a pathetic burden. The missing puzzle pieces violently snapped together with agonizing, crystal-clear clarity. The increasingly frequent emergency business trips, the whispered, late-night phone calls, the freezing emotional distance that had slowly mutated into an unbridgeable, toxic abyss. The massive betrayal was absolutely no longer just a dark suspicion. It was a cold, brutal, undeniable reality. "So this is exactly what it is," she whispered, physically feeling the expensive hardwood floor violently vanish from beneath her feet. "After all these agonizing years of supporting you, you are ruthlessly throwing me out exactly as if I were absolutely nothing." "Do not be incredibly melodramatic," he stated coldly, aggressively downing the burning whiskey in a single, massive gulp. I am absolutely not a monster. I will generously take care of you. Permanently vacate this penthouse today. I will graciously provide you with a massive monthly allowance. You will absolutely never have to worry about money. Just leave me the hell alone. Raise that child completely away from me. Explicitly tell it that its father tragically died. Invent a pathetic story. My life, starting this exact second, is violently moving in a completely different direction. In that exact, agonizing microsecond, amidst the completely devastating, crushing pain, an ancient, unbreakable strength violently awakened deep inside Lauren. The fierce pride and absolute dignity that formed the very core of her soul aggressively overpowered her desperate despair. She stood perfectly, incredibly straight. Her chin tilted upward, and her eyes, now completely, beautifully clear of all tears, locked onto him with a terrifying intensity that actually forced him to physically take a step back. I absolutely do not want your dirty money, Mark. I absolutely do not want your expensive apartment, and I absolutely refuse your pathetic, guilt-bought allowance. I want absolutely nothing that comes from your toxic hands. She slowly, confidently picked up her purse, where the very first ultrasound of her innocent child rested. That tiny, blurry piece of paper was now her absolute, only guiding compass. You aren't just legally terminating a marriage today, Mark. You are ruthlessly abandoning your own biological son. And I absolutely, fiercely promise you, one day, you will violently regret this decision with every single agonizing cell in your entire body. He let out a short, highly toxic, contemptuous scoff. Good luck in your pathetic new life. Lauren absolutely did not waste a single extra syllable on him. She confidently turned her back and marched directly toward the heavy oak door. Every single step was a massive, violent assertion of her absolute independence. Crossing that threshold, she didn't just permanently leave behind a toxic husband. She violently left behind an entire fake life of empty luxury, superficial appearances, and a love that had proven to be nothing more than a disgusting lie. She absolutely did not look back. Lauren just walked away from millions to keep her dignity. Would you have taken the money or walked away like she did? Tell us in the comments. Part 2. The Invisible Climb. Her strategic escape was incredibly methodical and highly rapid. She aggressively sold every single piece of expensive designer jewelry he had ever given her, ruthlessly transforming the pathetic symbols of his fake love into massive liquid capital for her real, independent future. With that cash, she quietly rented a highly modest, simple apartment in Queens, completely outside the glittering Manhattan bubble. It was a humble place where the elite last name, Sterling, absolutely did not open any heavy doors. A quiet place where she could finally just be Lauren. Absolute anonymity was her impenetrable shield. Those first agonizing months were a brutal, terrifying test of her physical and mental endurance. The high-risk pregnancy was heavily marked by crushing loneliness and terrifying uncertainty. She violently struggled to find decent corporate work, as her completely flawless Ivy League resume prompted way too many highly suspicious questions about her recent sudden unemployment and her explosive separation from a famous billionaire. One freezing afternoon, while walking past a massive, hyper-modern glass skyscraper in the financial district, she spotted a small, discreet hiring notice for a third-shift commercial cleaning crew. The massive, glowing silver letters on the building facade were incredibly imposing. Thorn Global Logistics. The cosmic irony was incredibly cruel, but her desperate need to survive was infinitely stronger. Absolutely no one would ever recognize her here. To a corporate cleaning crew, an elite master's degree from an international university was absolutely worthless compared to a pair of willing, calloused hands. The brutal interview was incredibly fast and highly impersonal. The night supervisor, a deeply exhausted but fair woman named Maria, barely even looked at Lauren's face. They desperately needed an invisible body for the graveyard shift. The physical labor was highly grueling. The hourly pay was absolutely minimum wage, but it was a solid start. It was the pure, unadulterated dignity she was desperately searching for. Lauren aggressively accepted the job on the spot, and so the highly educated, elegant woman, who had once confidently attended elite charity galas and flawlessly discussed modern art in Paris, began wearing a highly unflattering, baggy gray uniform and pushing a heavy, squeaking janitor's cart through the dead-silent, completely empty corridors of a massive corporate empire. The sharp, stinging scent of industrial bleach entirely replaced her expensive Chanel perfume. Her soft hands, once perfectly accustomed to holding delicate crystal champagne flutes, now aggressively wielded heavy mops and dirty rags with a painful, mechanical efficiency. The brutal labor was both her ultimate salvation and her agonizing penance. Late at night, while the massive corporate offices were completely asleep, Lauren fought a terrifying, silent battle. The extreme physical exertion was incredibly punishing on her rapidly changing, pregnant body. The sharp, shooting pain in her lower back was absolutely constant, and bone-crushing exhaustion was her permanent, inescapable companion. Often, locked securely inside the private staff restroom, she would lean heavily against the cold porcelain sink, breathing incredibly deeply, physically feeling her unborn son violently kicking inside her. She would fiercely whisper, "This is absolutely all for you. Every single second of this is for you." She had become an absolute ghost, a highly functional, completely invisible presence that absolutely no one ever noticed. The very few elite corporate executives who stayed incredibly late viewed her exactly as if she were a piece of the office furniture. To them, she possessed absolutely no name and absolutely no history, and that was exactly, perfectly, what she desperately wanted. Part 3. The Language of Power. One late rainy night, while aggressively scrubbing the massive imported marble floor of the executive boardroom on the absolute highest floor, a highly secure floor that Lauren usually desperately avoided, she finally allowed herself one single, tiny moment of weakness. She completely stopped working and stood completely still in front of the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass window, staring blankly out at the breathtaking, glittering lights of the Manhattan skyline. A single, hot tear silently rolled down her cheek. As she slowly resumed violently scrubbing the floor, a heavily muffled, highly aggressive sound violently pierced through the thick wall of the primary conference room, the massive room the employees terrifiedly called the aquarium, due to its completely transparent glass walls. "This is absolutely unacceptable. This is a catastrophic failure," a powerful male voice violently roared. The sheer volume vibrated aggressively right through the heavy, closed oak door. It was incredibly rare to see any human movement on this elite floor so late at night, especially inside the C-suite luxury offices. Lauren rapidly began pushing her heavy cleaning cart away, desperately wanting nothing more than to remain completely unnoticed and escape the massive, toxic energy radiating from that room. In the exact microsecond she was quietly passing the frosted glass door, it violently burst open. An incredibly tall, highly imposing man wearing a flawlessly tailored, bespoke suit, but with wildly disheveled hair and a face violently flushed with pure rage, suddenly appeared in the doorway. His sharp, predatory eyes aggressively scanned the empty hallway and violently locked onto Lauren. He absolutely didn't look at her as a human being. He merely registered her gray cleaning uniform. It was Elias Thorne, the billionaire global CEO, the absolute untouchable owner of this entire massive empire. "You!" he barked, his deep voice violently cutting through the air, exactly like shattered glass. "Get in here right now. Someone spilled a massive glass of water on the mahogany table. Aggressively clean it up immediately." He absolutely did not wait for a single syllable of a response. He violently spun around and marched right back inside, leaving the heavy door slightly ajar. Lauren, keeping her head submissively lowered, slowly walked into the massive room. The atmosphere inside was one of absolute, highly contained chaos. Highly confidential legal papers were violently scattered across the massive 20-foot conference table, and a completely shattered glass of water had created a massive puddle dangerously close to a $5,000 laptop. Elias Thorne was aggressively pacing back and forth exactly like a starving lion trapped in a cage, his phone violently pressed to his ear. "I literally do not give a damn about the massive time difference, David. The absolute final deadline is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Your highly paid elite translators are completely, utterly incompetent. This single microscopic paragraph is going to violently cost us the absolute largest corporate contract in the entire history of this company." He violently hurled his expensive phone directly onto the table. "Sir, the certified elite legal translator we desperately secured explicitly stated she absolutely cannot review the document until tomorrow afternoon," one of the senior vice presidents stammered, his voice violently shaking in pure terror. "We aggressively ran it through 3 different, highly advanced AI translation programs, but the output versions absolutely do not match. Clause 47B is completely, utterly illegible in all of them. It highly appears to be an incredibly obscure, highly specific, technical legal dialect." "Illegible?" Elias let out a highly toxic, humorless laugh that echoed loudly. "I will explicitly tell you exactly what is illegible. What is illegible is that my elite executive team, men pulling massive 6-figure salaries, literally cannot solve a pathetic translation error. We are talking about a massive $200 million exclusive contract with the absolute largest distribution conglomerate in China. China is the absolute most critical, vital partner for our global logistics right now. And the complex legal language is incredibly difficult, and we are going to violently lose it all over one single, pathetic paragraph." In a massive fit of pure rage and absolute desperation, he violently slammed his fist down onto the mahogany table. "I am officially offering my entire, massive personal salary for this entire month. Exactly 1 month of my total compensation to absolutely anyone in this damn room who can flawlessly translate this garbage document right this exact second. Perfectly. So I can confidently call the Chinese partners and explicitly tell them exactly what they are legally signing." A heavy, terrifying, dead silence violently hung in the massive room. The highly paid corporate directors stared at each other completely helplessly. It was an absolute impossible challenge. Lauren had just successfully finished wiping up the absolute last drop of spilled water. She absolutely should have quietly backed out of the room and safely returned to her invisible, anonymous life. But the highly complex Chinese legal characters printed on the paper, clearly visible from exactly where she was standing, violently caught her eye. She silently read them, and she perfectly understood them. She implicitly understood the massive complexity, the highly specific technical nuance, the ancient legal jargon that would aggressively confuse absolutely any artificial intelligence program on Earth. This was her exact elite domain. This was the massive, powerful world she had violently left behind. Her heart violently slammed against her ribs, It was a massive risk, an absolutely catastrophic risk. But the horrifying image of the cheap, empty baby crib waiting in her freezing apartment, the agonizing memory of the painful, sleepless nights, the absolute urgency of physically securing a safe, untouchable life for her unborn son. All of it violently outweighed her fear. The true dignity she was desperately searching for wasn't just found in breaking her back with physical labor. It was found in fiercely weaponizing the brilliant gifts she naturally possessed. With the damp cleaning rag still tightly gripped in her hand, she slowly, proudly stood up completely straight. For the absolute first time in agonizing months, her posture was absolutely no longer that of a hunched, pathetic cleaning lady. It was the fierce, untouchable posture of Lauren, the elite Ivy League scholar. I can absolutely translate that for you. Her voice, though incredibly quiet, violently sliced through the dead silence exactly like a razor-sharp blade. Absolutely every single eye in the massive room aggressively snapped toward her, first with pure confusion, then with absolute, unadulterated disbelief. Elias Thorne stared intensely at her, his dark eyebrows violently furrowing exactly as if she were a sudden, bizarre hallucination. "What the hell did you just say?" he asked, his deep tone a highly toxic mixture of pure contempt and extreme irritation. "I explicitly stated that I can flawlessly translate the legal document, sir," Lauren repeated, her voice now forged of pure, unbreakable steel. She took one highly confident step directly toward the massive table. "I am absolutely fluent in elite, corporate Mandarin." One of the arrogant vice presidents let out a highly nervous, mocking chuckle. "Ma'am, with all due respect to your position, this is a highly complex, billion-dollar international legal document." "I am completely aware of that," Lauren violently interrupted him, keeping her fierce eyes permanently locked onto Elias. "It is a highly complex, intermodal logistics contract. Specifically, detailing the massive liability clauses for unauthorized cargo transshipment in completely unprotected territories, and the massive financial penalties for catastrophic refrigerated container failure. Clause 47B, the exact clause your expensive computer programs completely failed to comprehend, utilizes a highly archaic, ancient term from traditional Chinese maritime law to strictly define force majeure. It absolutely must be translated conceptually, not literally." The arrogant director's jaws literally dropped wide open. Elias Thorne was now staring at her with an entirely different, terrifying intensity. The violent anger in his eyes rapidly gave way to a massive, blinding flash of pure shock and intense curiosity. He aggressively studied her for one incredibly long, agonizing second. A woman in a baggy, cheap gray uniform, speaking with a fierce, absolute authority that completely, utterly defied her pathetic social standing. With extreme hesitation, but possessing absolutely no other viable option, he slowly slid the highly confidential paper across the mahogany table directly toward her. "Translate it." Lauren calmly placed the damp rag onto the edge of her plastic cleaning cart. Her soft hands, which only minutes ago had been violently scrubbing the floor, confidently picked up the legal document with a deeply forgotten, fierce familiarity. Her sharp eyes rapidly scanned the dense lines of characters, and the complex words effortlessly poured out of her. Not in broken, hesitant English, but in flawless, highly commanding corporate negotiation terminology. She didn't just passively translate, she aggressively interpreted. She brilliantly explained the hidden nuances, perfectly contextualized the ancient terms, and actively offered Elias not just a simple text, but the exact, lethal weapon he desperately needed to aggressively dominate the negotiations. Her brilliant translation was infinitely clearer, infinitely more precise, and significantly smarter than any elite machine or highly paid expert could have ever produced. When she finally finished speaking, a totally stunned, deafening silence completely filled the massive room. She had successfully, flawlessly deciphered the completely indecipherable in under 5 minutes. Elias aggressively snatched his phone off the table. He violently dialed a massive international number. When the Chinese partners finally answered, he spoke with absolute, terrifying, icy calm, aggressively utilizing the exact, specific terminology and brilliant legal concepts that Lauren had just handed him. The tense conversation was incredibly brief. When he finally hung up the phone, a massive, triumphant smile, the absolute first one of the entire grueling night, violently broke across his handsome face. "The $200 million contract is officially ours," he proudly announced to the room. The stressed directors instantly erupted into massive, loud sighs of pure relief. Elias slowly turned back to face Lauren. The profound amazement written on his face was entirely genuine. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his deep voice now completely, utterly stripped of absolutely all its former arrogance. Lauren stared directly back at him. The bone-crushing exhaustion of the long night and the tragic agony of her ruined life violently merged into a brand new, incredibly fierce determination. She was absolutely no longer an invisible ghost. "I am the exact woman who just flawlessly saved your massive $200 million global contract," she stated, her voice incredibly calm and completely unwavering. "And you officially, legally, owe me your entire massive salary for this month." Lauren just demanded a billionaire's monthly salary. Would you have had the courage to do that? Tell us in the comments. Part 4. The New Pact. The heavy echo of Lauren's bold demand hung violently suspended in the massive boardroom, completely charged with a terrifying weight that absolutely no one in the room had expected. The highly paid directors rapidly looked back and forth between her and Elias, their mouths hanging wide open in shock, actively witnessing a massive, violent shift in power so incredibly sudden and total that it felt entirely surreal. The invisible cleaning lady hadn't just miraculously saved the absolute biggest corporate deal of the entire year. She was now aggressively demanding a massive payout. With absolutely zero hesitation, she was fiercely holding the most powerful, untouchable man in the building to his exact spoken promise. Elias Thorne stared intensely at her for a very long time. The initial, blinding shock rapidly gave way to a massive, profound appreciation. He clearly saw the crushing physical exhaustion resting heavily on her shoulders, but he also vividly saw the unbreakable rod of pure steel holding her perfectly upright. He saw the pathetic simplicity of the cheap gray uniform and the terrifying, beautiful complexity of a brilliant intellect that had literally just completely outperformed his entire team of elite executives. He, a ruthless billionaire, completely accustomed to having absolute total control over everything, was completely, utterly disarmed. A slow, almost imperceptible smile gently touched his lips. It was absolutely not a smile of arrogant mockery, but of genuine, profound admiration. "Fair enough," he stated, his deep voice now perfectly calm and highly controlled. "An absolute promise is an absolute promise." He slowly looked over at his terrified chief financial officer, who still looked completely incapable of believing what he was actively witnessing. "Immediately prepare a massive corporate wire transfer for the absolute total sum of my gross executive salary for this current month." Then he aggressively turned back to Lauren. "The massive payment will be completely processed by tomorrow morning. I urgently need your banking details." "They are currently on file with Human Resources," Lauren replied. Her absolute, terrifying calmness perfectly mirrored his. She did absolutely not allow herself to smile or visually show even an ounce of relief. She simply stated the fact exactly as if successfully closing a multi-million-dollar transaction was the most incredibly natural thing in the world. She slowly picked up her damp rag, perfectly placed it back onto her plastic cleaning cart, and with the exact same quiet humility with which she had entered, she calmly turned to leave. "Wait," Elias called out. "What is your actual name?" "Lauren," she replied softly, absolutely not looking back. And then she completely disappeared down the dark, silent corridor, leaving behind a massive, thick silence completely filled with terrifying, unanswered questions. Early the very next morning, Lauren was violently awoken by the loud notification chime on her cheap, cracked phone. It was an urgent alert from her bank. A massive, direct deposit had just successfully cleared her account. The staggering sum was so astronomically high, so incredibly, absurdly larger than absolutely everything she currently owned, that she literally had to blink and check it 3 separate times just to believe it. It was significantly more money than she would ever need to comfortably, safely raise her unborn son for years. The absolute first tier of genuine, pure relief she had felt in agonizing months silently rolled down her pale face. This was absolute security. This was a guaranteed future. This was the undeniable, physical proof that her terrifying bravery had absolutely not been in vain. Later that exact afternoon, as she was exhaustedly preparing for another grueling night shift, her phone violently rang. An unknown, highly secure corporate number. With deep hesitation, she answered. "Lauren, it is Elias Thorne." Her heart violently skipped a beat. "Mr. Thorne, please, strictly call me Elias. I am personally calling to explicitly confirm that the massive payment successfully went through. But I'm also calling to formally make you a massive offer." He paused, his voice turning incredibly serious. "The massive contract with our Chinese partners was successfully signed entirely because of you. But it is incredibly complex, and the brutal negotiations will have massive consequences for months. I desperately need someone who deeply, intimately understands the exact nuances of their language and their unique corporate culture to aggressively shadow these negotiations. Someone I can absolutely, blindly trust." Another long pause. "I would like to formally offer you a highly lucrative, independent contract as an elite consultant and lead translator. You will be working directly, exclusively alongside me on this massive project. The financial compensation will be incredibly substantial." Lauren slowly sat heavily on the edge of her cheap mattress. The massive weight of the incredible offer violently crashed down on her, leaving her absolute anonymity. Working shoulder to shoulder with the billionaire CEO was a massive, terrifying risk. But it was also a miraculous, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to aggressively utilize her brilliant skills, to possess a job that wouldn't physically, brutally break her body, especially now that her high-risk pregnancy was rapidly progressing. "I aggressively accept," she stated, her voice made of pure steel. The massive deal was officially sealed. Lauren absolutely never had to wear that pathetic, gray uniform ever again. From that exact day forward, she began proudly frequenting the elite top floor of Thorne Global Logistics, absolutely not as an invisible, silent ghost, but as a highly indispensable, powerful executive consultant. The exact same arrogant directors who had previously looked right through her with pure contempt now nervously greeted her with deep, fearful respect. Elias was a highly demanding but incredibly fair boss, and his intense, burning curiosity about her was physically palpable. During the incredibly long, grueling hours, They spent aggressively analyzing complex legal clauses and dominating high-stakes video conferences with Beijing and Shanghai. He constantly, intensely watched her. He deeply noticed exactly how she flawlessly, brilliantly switched between Russian, English, and Mandarin with breathtaking, terrifying fluency. He noticed her incredible strategic intellect, her unnatural ability to brilliantly anticipate massive problems, and her terrifying, absolute calm under immense pressure. This beautiful woman was an absolute captivating mystery. "Where exactly did you learn to aggressively negotiate in Mandarin like that?" he asked softly one late evening, right after a particularly brutal, high-stakes conference call that she had flawlessly masterminded. Lauren hesitated for one single microsecond. "I lived in Shanghai for exactly 2 years. I aggressively completed a major portion of my master's degree there, in international relations." The massive revelation completely caught Elias off guard. "A master's degree? And you were aggressively scrubbing my floors?" She stared directly at him. Her beautiful eyes silently communicated a massive history of agonizing pain that she absolutely didn't need to vocalize. Life often violently drags us down highly unexpected, terrifying paths. I desperately needed to start completely from scratch. I violently left absolutely everything behind. I desperately wanted to build my brand new life entirely with my own brutal hard work and my own absolute dignity. Slowly, over time, through brief, highly fragmented conversations between massive corporate meetings, Elias began aggressively piecing the complex puzzle together. He learned about her elite Ivy League education, her years working abroad, and inevitably, through a highly discreet, deep background check aggressively conducted by his executive assistant, he finally discovered the horrifying truth about her past. Lauren Sterling, the brutally discarded ex-wife of the millionaire CEO Mark Sterling. One quiet evening, he gently asked her, not with aggressive accusation, but with pure, genuine care. "You were legally married to Mark Sterling?" Lauren absolutely did not flinch. "Yes, I was." "What exactly happened?" he asked incredibly softly. She took a massive, deep breath, internally deciding to grant him the exact portion of the brutal truth that actually mattered. He arrogantly decided that he desperately wanted a completely different, shiny new life with a completely different person. And I fiercely decided that I absolutely didn't want a single damn thing that came from his toxic hands. So I violently walked away with absolutely nothing but exactly what I could physically carry. I wanted to aggressively build my own untouchable empire. She deliberately did absolutely not mention the horrific betrayal. And infinitely more importantly, she absolutely did not mention the pregnancy. To her, her unborn son was an absolute, holy sanctuary, a matter way too incredibly intimate and terrifyingly fragile to ever share in a ruthless corporate environment. She was absolutely terrified of massive judgment, terrified of toxic corporate rumors, terrified of the distinct possibility that Elias would view her as incredibly complicated. The exact same toxic word Mark had cruelly used to throw her away like garbage. The massive revelation completely, permanently transformed exactly how Elias viewed her. The deep admiration for her sheer competence was now heavily mixed with a profound, terrifying respect for the unbreakable strength of her character. This woman absolutely wasn't just brilliant. She was an ultimate, fierce survivor. A beautiful phoenix that he had miraculously been lucky enough to discover rising from the ashes. And for the absolute first time in his entire life, a life completely, obsessively focused entirely on corporate dominance and massive profit, Elias Thorne violently felt the overwhelming desire to fiercely protect and deeply care for something infinitely more valuable than any multi-million-dollar contract. Interactive question. Lauren and Elias are getting closer. Do you think she should tell him about the baby now or keep it a secret? Tell us below. Part 5. The Threat and the Shield. The rapidly growing closeness to Elias was simultaneously a massive blessing and a terrifying, agonizing torture for Lauren. Working intimately, shoulder to shoulder with him, physically feeling his intense admiration and deep respect, aggressively awakened feelings deep within her shattered heart that she genuinely thought had violently died forever. Yes, she was slowly, terrifyingly, falling in love with Elias. But this beautiful, growing feeling was heavily accompanied by an absolute, freezing panic. There was a massive, ticking time bomb of a secret between them. A secret that was visibly, aggressively growing larger every single day. Her stomach, now heavily entering her 6th month of pregnancy, could absolutely no longer be easily hidden by oversized, tailored blazers or high-waisted designer dresses. It was a massive, physical truth, a constant, highly visible reminder of her extreme vulnerability. Telling him felt completely, utterly impossible. How on earth could she possibly explain why she had intentionally hidden something so incredibly fundamental? What if he immediately viewed her as highly dishonest, or infinitely worse, as a massive problem? A toxic complication carrying another man's baggage. The sheer, unadulterated fear completely paralyzed her, while Lauren brilliantly shined in the executive C-suite. Toxic, highly dangerous seeds of massive envy were aggressively sprouting on the lower corporate floors. Her meteoric, unprecedented rise, from a completely invisible cleaning lady to the global CEO's most trusted, highly paid confidant, was the absolute main topic of highly toxic gossip in the break rooms and dark corridors. To many, it was a beautiful, inspiring fairy tale. To others, specifically, certain highly arrogant executives who had long desperately craved Elias Thorne's powerful favor, it was a massive, unforgivable insult. Lauren's increasingly obvious pregnancy violently became their absolute, perfect, lethal weapon. The toxic rumors aggressively began as highly venomous whispers. "Have you seen the boss's brand new protege? She's completely knocked up. Who the hell is the father? It is incredibly suspicious that she just magically appeared out of absolutely nowhere. They say she used to literally scrub the toilets here. She must have violently done something highly inappropriate to aggressively climb the corporate ladder so fast." The malicious, highly destructive narrative aggressively spread exactly like a violent wildfire, heavily fueled by pure jealousy and deep resentment. The true history was completely, maliciously twisted into a highly fabricated, toxic lie. The mysterious, manipulative translator is aggressively using a pregnancy of highly questionable origin to maliciously trap the billionaire CEO. The toxic gossip finally reached the ears of the two most senior directors, Mr. Mercer and Mr. Vance. Two highly arrogant men who felt massively, personally threatened by Lauren's rapidly growing influence, and incredibly uncomfortable with the massive, intense attention Elias was showering upon her. They aggressively viewed her as a massive anomaly. A highly dangerous breach in the strict corporate hierarchy. The pregnancy was the absolute perfect, ironclad excuse to violently restore their toxic order. One late afternoon, when Elias was away on a highly critical, one-day business trip to Chicago, Lauren was aggressively summoned to a sudden, highly irregular meeting. Walking into the cold conference room, she found the two massive directors waiting with incredibly serious, highly calculating expressions. There was absolutely zero warmth in their dead eyes. "Lauren, please sit down immediately," said Mr. Mercer, a gray-haired, highly arrogant man with a freezing, dead stare. "We have been highly officially informed about your massive physical condition." Lauren's heart violently dropped into her stomach. "My condition?" "Your highly obvious pregnancy," the other director, Mr. Vance, finished bluntly, exactly like a physical punch. "The massive corporation has a highly strict moral policy, you know, and your specific, highly questionable situation, quite frankly, has aggressively become a massive source of toxic distraction and wild speculation. Since you are merely an independent freelancer and absolutely not a protected full-time employee, this is incredibly damaging to the pristine public image of this multi-billion-dollar firm. My corporate work has been absolutely flawlessly impeccable," Lauren fired back. Her voice was pure steel, despite the violent trembling of her hands. "My highly private personal life absolutely does not interfere with my massive professional responsibilities." "It absolutely doesn't look that way to the board," Mercer aggressively countered. "Your massive rise was suspiciously, terrifyingly rapid. Your personal history is highly cloudy. And now, this highly questionable pregnancy. We absolutely must fiercely protect the multi-billion-dollar company, and we must aggressively shield Mr. Thorne from highly embarrassing, toxic public situations." The massive threat was completely veiled, but absolutely, terrifyingly explicit. They were aggressively painting her as a highly manipulative, disgusting gold digger. They brutally presented her with exactly two horrifying options. Both were incredibly cruel. They could aggressively launch a highly public, massive investigation into her personal life, completely ruining her professional reputation forever. Or she could quietly, immediately, sign a formal letter of voluntary resignation for personal reasons and disappear completely silently into the night, accompanied by a pathetic, tiny financial severance package simply to buy her permanent silence. The massive humiliation violently struck her like a physical blow to the face. She desperately thought about fiercely fighting back. She thought about aggressively marching directly to Elias the second he returned and screaming the absolute truth. But blinding fear violently overcame her, the horrifying fear that he, discovering the pregnancy from highly toxic third parties amidst a massive swirl of disgusting rumors, would blindly believe their toxic version of events. The terrifying fear of having to pathetically justify herself, of looking incredibly weak, of physically watching the deep admiration in his beautiful eyes violently mutate into pathetic pity, or infinitely worse, absolute distrust. The massive, bleeding wound left by Mark's brutal abandonment was still incredibly raw and highly sensitive. She absolutely could not survive their catastrophic rejection. With her head completely lowered and her soul violently shattered into a million jagged pieces, she slowly picked up the expensive pen. She violently signed her own professional death warrant, feeling exactly as utterly helpless and completely pathetic as she had on the exact day her toxic husband had thrown her away like garbage. Part 6. The Reckoning and the Epiphany. Elias violently returned the very next morning, incredibly eager to aggressively discuss the next massive phase of the Chinese expansion project with Lauren. Arriving at her highly exclusive executive floor, he found a bizarre, terrifying silence. Her massive desk was completely, utterly empty. "Where the hell is Lauren?" he aggressively demanded of his executive assistant. The assistant looked absolutely terrified, desperately avoiding his intense gaze. "She formally resigned, sir, yesterday late afternoon. She explicitly left this formal letter." Elias aggressively snatched the envelope, his mind completely refusing to believe it. The letter was incredibly brief, highly formal, and chillingly impersonal. Due to highly unforeseen personal reasons, I am officially submitting my immediate resignation. It made absolutely zero sense. They were at the absolute massive peak of the biggest project in corporate history. Their personal relationship was deepening incredibly every single day. Why on earth would she violently walk away just like this? Without a single word? Without a single phone call? He frantically dialed her cell phone. Straight to voicemail. He aggressively dialed again and again. Nothing. Deeply confused and filled with a horrifying sense of dread, he aggressively summoned Mercer and Vance to his office. "What the hell exactly happened here?" Elias roared. "Why did Lauren suddenly resign?" The two arrogant directors exchanged a highly rehearsed, toxic look. "Mr. Thorne," Mercer began, his voice dripping with highly fake, pathetic solemnity. "It was an incredibly delicate, highly toxic situation. We recently discovered that she is heavily pregnant." Elias physically felt exactly as if he had been violently punched in the gut. "Pregnant? What the hell does that have to do with absolutely anything?" "Well," Vance smoothly continued, "she aggressively, maliciously hid it from absolutely everyone. And with the massive, highly toxic rumors actively circulating the firm, we highly suspect she felt the intense pressure and cowardly chose to flee. We absolutely do not know who the real father is. She was briefly married to Mark Sterling years ago, but she has apparently been highly involved with several other questionable men. It looks exactly like a highly messy, toxic situation." Elias's brilliant mind violently began to spin, aggressively connecting the dots in the absolute most agonizing, painful way possible. She maliciously hid a massive pregnancy from him. She, the woman who had cried and told him about being ruthlessly abandoned, was heavily pregnant by another man. Who? What other men? A secret, toxic boyfriend she had absolutely never mentioned. Or infinitely worse. The timeline was incredibly tight. Did she aggressively cheat on her former husband? Did she get knocked up by a random stranger and then pathetically get dumped by both of them? The fierce, beautiful woman he had completely placed on a massive pedestal of pure honesty and unbreakable strength suddenly looked exactly like a highly manipulative, disgusting liar. The profound admiration he had deeply felt violently mutated into a massive, bitter disappointment. He felt exactly like an absolute pathetic fool. A massive idiot who had almost fallen blindly in love with a highly constructed, incredibly fake farce. The agonizing pain of the perceived betrayal completely blinded him. He absolutely did not question the director's highly toxic, rehearsed version of events. He only felt pure, unadulterated rage and crushing disappointment violently take over. In a massive, violent gesture of deeply wounded pride, he aggressively ripped open his phone contacts, found the name Lauren, and with a finger violently shaking with pure rage, he aggressively hit delete. He violently erased her from his phone, and with the exact same ruthless determination, he fiercely swore to himself that he would completely, permanently erase her from his life. Elias just deleted her number. Do you think the truth will come out before it's too late? Drop a heart if you believe in their love story. Part 7. The Power of Truth. Thick night descended heavily upon the glittering city, but for Elias, the absolute darkest shadows were completely trapped inside his own luxurious office. The burning whiskey in his heavy crystal glass absolutely could not drown out the massive, toxic bitterness he felt. He paced aggressively like a caged animal. The beautiful, pristine image of Lauren in his mind had violently shattered. The brilliant, fiercely integral woman he deeply admired was now aggressively blurring with the terrifying image of a manipulative stranger, completely full of toxic secrets. He aggressively snatched up his phone and dialed his best friend, desperately needing to violently vent, to forcefully expel the massive, consuming turmoil, eating him alive. "I literally do not understand it," Elias growled, his voice incredibly tight with pure frustration. "She just violently disappeared. And this entire massive pregnancy thing, she didn't breathe a single damn word to me. I feel exactly like a massive, pathetic idiot. I was genuinely about to fully commit to this woman, and she was maliciously lying to me the entire damn time. What kind of sick, twisted person actually does that?" At that exact, critical microsecond, the heavy oak door to his office slowly swung open. It was Maria, the night supervisor, quietly pushing her heavy cleaning cart, fully prepared to begin her grueling night shift. She completely froze in the doorway, her heart stopping when she clearly heard her dear friend's name violently mentioned, with such agonizing pain and massive anger. Her primal survival instinct screamed at her to aggressively retreat, to absolutely not interfere with the untouchable billionaire CEO. But then, she deeply looked at the massive, crushing suffering etched onto her boss's face, an agonizing suffering that perfectly, tragically mirrored the exact same devastation she had witnessed on Lauren's face just yesterday afternoon. And her fiercely loyal, brave heart absolutely refused to allow her to remain silent. This massive, toxic injustice absolutely could not be allowed to stand. With a terrifying burst of absolute courage she had absolutely no idea she even possessed, Maria loudly, aggressively, cleared her throat. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne." Elias violently spun around, deeply surprised and highly irritated by the sudden interruption. "Not right now, Maria. Please." "I am incredibly sorry, sir. I absolutely did not mean to eavesdrop," Maria stated, aggressively taking a bold step completely inside the massive office. Her calloused hands were fiercely gripping a cleaning rag. "But you are loudly talking about Lauren, and absolutely everything you are arrogantly assuming is completely, utterly wrong." Elias slowly lowered his phone. His intense, burning curiosity violently overpowered his deep irritation. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Lauren is absolutely not a toxic liar," Maria continued, her voice violently cracking with pure, raw emotion. "She is the absolute strongest, most fiercely honest woman I have ever met in my entire life. Do you want to know exactly why she absolutely never told you about the pregnancy? It was out of pure, unadulterated terror, out of deep, crushing shame. That innocent child she is desperately carrying is 100% from her toxic ex-husband, the millionaire monster who violently threw her out into the freezing street the exact same day she happily told him she was pregnant. He ruthlessly abandoned her in the absolute darkest, most terrifying moment of her entire life. Every single heavy word Maria spoke was exactly like a massive, blinding spotlight violently clicking on in a pitch-black room, brutally exposing the horrifying truth that Elias had arrogantly refused to see. "She arrived in this freezing city with absolutely nothing," Maria continued, hot tears now freely streaming down her face. "She aggressively refused to take a single dime of his dirty alimony because she absolutely didn't want his toxic money. She just desperately wanted to raise her son with absolute pure dignity. She aggressively hid her growing belly the absolute best she could because she desperately physically needed this job to survive. She was utterly terrified she would be instantly fired if anyone found out. And that is exactly what maliciously happened, isn't it? Someone started a highly toxic, disgusting rumor, and those arrogant directors ruthlessly weaponized it to violently force her out." Maria took a massive, deep breath, glaring fearlessly, directly into the eyes of the absolute most powerful man in the massive building. "That massive, staggering amount of money you paid her, your entire month's salary, She absolutely did not spend a single dime of it on luxury garbage. She aggressively paid for an entire year of cheap rent completely in advance, and she bought a tiny, cheap crib for the baby, just to make absolutely sure he would never be homeless. The salary she earned here as your elite translator went entirely to basic survival, food, and cheap electricity. She is absolutely not a disgusting gold digger. She is a desperate, fiercely protective mother violently trying to survive. Elias was completely, utterly paralyzed. The heavy crystal glass of expensive whiskey was totally forgotten in his hand. The highly toxic, fake image aggressively painted by the malicious directors. The terrifying narrative violently constructed by his own wounded ego. Absolutely everything completely, entirely, collapsed into dust. He absolutely didn't see a manipulative liar anymore. He vividly saw an incredibly terrified, fiercely brave woman fighting a brutal, violent war against the entire world, completely alone. Violently trying to protect herself and her unborn son, exactly like a fierce, wild animal violently protecting her cub. And he had arrogantly judged her with the exact same brutal cruelty that the toxic world had already violently crushed her with. Massive, overwhelming emotions hit him with the violent force of a hurricane. A highly toxic mixture of crushing shame, deep, agonizing regret, and an even significantly deeper, fiercer admiration than he had ever felt before. "Where the hell is she?" Elias demanded, his voice completely hoarse. "I urgently need her exact address and her new phone number right this exact second, please." Maria rapidly scribbled Lauren's cheap apartment address and brand new burner number onto a scrap piece of paper. Elias aggressively snatched it exactly as if it were a priceless map to a holy treasure. He absolutely did not wait. He violently sprinted out of the massive office, threw himself into his armored SUV, and drove like a madman into the freezing night, aggressively tearing across the massive city directly toward the modest neighborhood, toward an absolute, brand new beginning. He found her in a tiny, incredibly modest walk-up apartment. When Lauren slowly opened the cheap wooden door and saw him standing in the freezing hallway, her face turned pure ghost white. She instinctively, violently, flinched backward, wrapping one arm fiercely around her massive belly, absolutely bracing herself for the final, brutal blow. The aggressive accusations, the complete validation of all her most terrifying fears, but instead of violent rage, Elias's beautiful eyes were completely filled with deep, agonizing, crushing regret. "Lauren," he whispered, his voice incredibly, impossibly soft. "Please, can we just talk?" That exact night, they absolutely did not dine in a massive, $1,000 a plate Michelin star restaurant. They ordered a cheap, highly greasy delivery pizza, which they quietly ate sitting at her tiny, wobbly kitchen table. And right there, under the dim, flickering light of a cheap bulb, Lauren finally, completely ripped her shattered heart wide open. She told him absolutely everything. The brutal, malicious betrayal, the horrifying, cold-blooded abandonment, the crushing, freezing loneliness, the blinding terror, the massive humiliation of working the graveyard shift, the terrifying, secret joy of feeling her son actively kicking, the absolute panic when she was violently cornered by the toxic directors. She hid absolutely nothing, sparing zero brutal details. Hot, heavy tears were finally, mercifully, allowed to freely, openly flow. Elias listened intensely to every single, agonizing word. His own heart violently shattered, and then miraculously pieced itself perfectly back together with every new, horrifying revelation. When she finally, completely finished, he slowly reached across the tiny table and gently, highly reverently, covered her shaking hand with his massive one. I was a complete, absolute, pathetic idiot, Lauren. I should have fiercely trusted you. I should have blindly trusted exactly what I vividly saw in your beautiful soul. Absolutely not the toxic, malicious garbage I was fed. I am so incredibly, deeply sorry that I ever doubted you for even a single microsecond. He paused, his intense gaze burning directly into hers. What those arrogant bastards maliciously did to you was incredibly vile and highly cowardly, and I absolutely promise you, it will absolutely not go unpunished. But first, I desperately want to make absolutely everything right with you. I desperately need you, he continued fiercely. The massive Chinese expansion project absolutely cannot survive without you. I want you to officially return to work for me, but entirely, strictly on your own exact terms. An elite, remote, highly paid executive consultant, working completely from the safety of your home, with absolute, strict respect for your pregnancy, your physical schedule, and your absolute well-being, completely insulated from the toxic gossip, far away from the disgusting corporate politics, just you and me, aggressively dominating this massive project together. Lauren looked deeply into his bloodshot eyes, now shining brilliantly with massive, undeniable hope. His incredible offer absolutely wasn't just a simple job. It was a profound, massive apology. It was an ultimate gesture of pure, unbreakable trust. It was massive respect. It was his beautiful, undeniable acknowledgement that he clearly saw her. All of her. Her entire brutal history, her massive pain, and her terrifying, unbreakable strength. And he was absolutely not terrified of any of it. For the absolute first time since her entire perfect life had violently fallen apart, she physically felt like she could finally pull oxygen into her lungs. Lauren accepted Elias's massive offer with a slow, fierce nod. The hot tears, still visibly wet on her beautiful face, were now tears of pure, absolute relief, absolutely no longer of agonizing pain. In that tiny, freezing apartment on the outskirts of the city, amidst the cheap, greasy pizza boxes and the raw, completely naked truths, they permanently sealed a massive, unbreakable new pact. One that aggressively went infinitely further than any highly paid employment contract. It was an absolute pact of pure trust and fierce, mutual respect. Part 8. Unlocking Trust and the Return. The highly intense next 3 months were an incredibly beautiful period of quiet, profound healing, and massive transformation. Working securely from her apartment, Lauren absolutely flourished, completely insulated from the toxic, prying eyes and the highly venomous corporate whispers. She aggressively dedicated herself to the massive project with a brilliantly clear, hyper-focused mind, peacefully living out the final, highly critical stages of her pregnancy with the absolute peace that had been violently stolen from her. Her daily communication with Elias was completely constant. It was a beautiful, seamless blend of highly aggressive corporate strategy and incredibly deep, personal connection. The massive video conferences regarding the billion-dollar contract frequently, beautifully lingered, magically transforming into hours-long, highly intimate conversations about life, massive dreams, and deep, dark fears. Elias, in turn, aggressively became a constant, incredibly tender, highly protective presence in her life. He absolutely wasn't overbearing, but his fierce care explicitly manifested in tiny, beautiful details. Massive, expensive meals delivered directly from her absolute favorite restaurants, the exact second he knew she was exhausted. Sweet, simple text messages, checking if she needed absolutely anything, or just offering a quiet, supportive ear to listen. He deeply, fully respected the massive defensive iron barrier she still heavily maintained around her shattered heart. But with infinite patience and absolute brutal consistency, he slowly, methodically dismantled it, brick by broken brick. When little Asher was finally beautifully born, a perfectly healthy, screaming baby boy with massive, curious eyes and thick chestnut curls, Elias was one of the absolute very first people to officially know. He visited her in the private hospital room, absolutely not as the terrifying, untouchable CEO of Thorn Global, but as a deeply devoted, loving friend. Holding the tiny, fragile child in his massive arms for the very first time, he physically felt a massive, violent surge of pure protective instinct, a terrifying, profound feeling that had absolutely nothing to do with corporate obligation and absolutely everything to do with pure, unadulterated love. He was violently, hopelessly falling in love, not just with Lauren, but with the tiny, beautiful family she fiercely represented. As the months rapidly passed, their profound, deeply intimate relationship naturally, beautifully evolved into a highly passionate romance. Initially, they were incredibly discreet, but it was absolutely impossible to hide the blinding, massive happiness they both physically radiated. When Asher's daily routine finally stabilized, and Lauren secured a highly trusted, elite nanny, personally recommended by her loyal friend, Maria, she finally, fiercely felt it was officially time for the next massive step. Elias aggressively invited her to officially return to the massive corporate headquarters, but absolutely not as a simple freelancer. He had specifically, legally, created a massive, brand new executive position entirely for her. Chief Director of International Relations, an elite, high-level C-suite post that perfectly, accurately matched her brilliant capabilities and the massive, undeniable financial value she aggressively brought to the global firm. Lauren's triumphant, massive return to Thorn Global Logistics was exactly like a violent, explosive shockwave. She confidently walked into the massive glass building, absolutely no longer with her head submissively lowered, but held incredibly, proudly high, walking fiercely right beside Elias. Her highly imposing presence on the executive floor, now officially operating as the CEO's equal partner and a massive board member, instantly, violently silenced some, while simultaneously igniting the toxic fury of others. The corporate criticism was highly veiled, but incredibly sharp. He only promoted her because he is sleeping with her. What kind of serious, powerful billionaire would ever take on a woman dragging around another man's bastard child? The exact same arrogant directors who had previously, maliciously sabotaged her. Mercer and Vance, whom Elias had aggressively, publicly demoted the absolute second he discovered the horrific truth, now actively led a quiet, highly toxic smear campaign. Elias was hyper-aware of every single toxic rumor and every malicious, sideways glance. But his absolute, terrifying indifference was his greatest, most lethal weapon. At the massive, company-wide annual shareholder meeting, he explicitly, highly intentionally, took the stage to formally, publicly introduce Lauren. Not just as the brilliant new executive director, but officially as his romantic partner. Many of you previously met Lauren under completely different, highly challenging circumstances, he proudly announced to the massive, packed auditorium. His deep voice resonated with absolute, terrifying power. But today, I desperately want you to know her for exactly who she truly is. the absolute most brilliantly competent, fierce professional I have ever met in my entire life, and the incredible woman I am overwhelmingly proud to have standing by my side. He aggressively reached out and grabbed her hand. A massive, highly public gesture of absolute dominance that instantly, violently, silenced the vast majority of the toxic critics. He literally did not give a single damn about her complicated past or the biological origin of her beautiful son. He only fiercely cared about the woman of absolute, unbreakable strength that she was. He proudly, loudly claimed her, and his massive, untouchable pride became her ultimate, impenetrable shield. For Lauren, sitting confidently at that massive mahogany executive table, on the exact same luxury floor where she had once agonizingly scrubbed the floors on her hands and knees, it was the ultimate, absolute validation of her brutal journey. She was absolutely no longer an invisible ghost. She was fiercely seen, deeply respected, and profoundly loved. Not in spite of her tragic history, but entirely, beautifully because of it. Part 9. The collision of past and present years violently flew by. The toxic dust completely settled, the massive, bleeding wounds fully scarred over, and the fierce, passionate love between Lauren and Elias only deepened, massively strengthened by immense mutual respect and the absolute, pure joy of raising little Asher, who was growing into an incredibly happy, fiercely loved little boy. And it was on a bright, sunny Thursday afternoon, almost exactly 3 years after that massive, triumphant corporate return, that the dead past and the beautiful present violently, spectacularly collided. The scene was the absolute, perfect epitome of Lauren's massive success. She was confidently walking out of the massive main doors of Thorn Global, laughing brightly at something Elias was saying right beside her. He had his arm wrapped fiercely, protectively around her waist as she lovingly adjusted little Asher, now an incredibly energetic, almost 3-year-old boy in her arms, who was happily babbling away. Lauren was absolutely radiant, the ultimate flawless image of a fiercely fulfilled, highly powerful woman. And in that exact, terrifying microsecond, Mark Sterling, arrogantly parking his Mercedes Maybach to drop his brand new ambitious girlfriend off at the advertising agency in the exact same building, vividly saw the entire scene unfold. He completely, utterly froze. All the blood violently drained from his face as he stared at the terrifying ghost of his absolute biggest, most catastrophic mistake, walking mere feet away from his idling car. The woman he had ruthlessly thrown away exactly like garbage, massively thriving. The incredibly powerful man beside her, a billionaire titan he secretly, intensely envied. And the child, the innocent child he had maliciously abandoned before it was even born. Lauren confidently walked right past him. Her beautiful gaze was fiercely focused entirely on her loving family, on her beautiful future. She didn't even notice him. To her, he was absolutely nothing more than a pathetic, invisible piece of the city scenery. But to him, she was a massive, violent earthquake. An earthquake that was rapidly, aggressively, shaking the very foundations of his carefully constructed, highly fake life to absolute rubble. Mark just saw the family he threw away. Do you think he will try to ruin her happiness? Tell us your predictions below. Part 10. The price of regret. The initial paralyzing shock rapidly mutated into a massive, feverish, toxic obsession. The horrifying image of Lauren, Elias, and most terrifyingly, the little boy, violently refused to leave Mark's mind. He desperately, urgently needed to know. After aggressively making several frantic calls to old mutual acquaintances, he finally managed to illegally obtain Lauren's brand new private phone number. She completely ignored the first call, the second too. On the third, she finally answered. Her voice was incredibly cold, highly professional, and utterly dead. "Lauren, it's Mark." A terrifying, heavy silence hung on the other end of the line. "What exactly do you want, Mark?" "I vividly saw you," he said, his voice rushing frantically. "Today, in front of the massive skyscraper. You were holding a little boy. I desperately need to know, Lauren. Who exactly is that child?" "I honestly do not think that is any of your damn business," she replied coldly, fully prepared to hang up the phone. "Please," he practically violently begged. Pure, unadulterated desperation leaked heavily into his voice. "His exact age. He looks exactly the right age. Is he? He is my son." Lauren took a massive, deep breath, aggressively gathering all of her unbreakable strength. She absolutely would not grant him the pathetic satisfaction of a dramatic fight. Only the cold, brutal truth, naked and simple. "Yes, Mark. His name is Asher. And yes, he is biologically your son." The dead silence on the other end of the line was the absolute, horrifying confirmation of the massive blow. In the highly chaotic days that followed, Mark violently launched a massive, desperate campaign of aggressive reconciliation. He frantically called. He aggressively texted. He showed up completely unannounced in the highly secure lobby of her luxury building, aggressively wielding ridiculously expensive, massive gifts for Asher, pathetically offering massive amounts of money, huge child support, absolutely everything she had once fiercely rejected. Lauren, possessing the terrifying, absolute calmness of a powerful general who had already flawlessly won the massive war, sat down and spoke deeply with Elias. She made a highly calculated, massive decision. She would allow Mark to briefly meet the child. Absolutely not for Mark's pathetic sake, but entirely for Asher, who would one day legally possess the fundamental right to fully know who his biological sperm donor actually was. The massive meeting was strictly scheduled in a highly public, neutral park. Mark arrived incredibly anxious, his heart violently hammering against his ribs. He saw little Asher happily running through the green grass, and his eyes instantly filled with hot, pathetic tears. He desperately attempted to step forward to aggressively hug Lauren, but she violently stepped back. Her entire body went rigid. "He is absolutely beautiful," Mark mumbled, pathetically holding out a massive, ridiculous teddy bear to the little boy, who stared at the strange man with deep, intense suspicion. "Yes, he absolutely is," Lauren agreed, her voice completely devoid of any emotion. Mark desperately attempted to justify his horrific actions. He pathetically rambled about his massive regret, about how he had absolutely no idea what he was doing, about his immense corporate stress. Lauren listened in absolute, dead silence. When he finally, pathetically finished, she glared at him with a terrifying, rock-hard stare and delivered the exact, brutal words that would violently haunt him for the rest of eternity. "You urgently need to understand exactly one thing, Mark. You absolutely did not just lose a romantic relationship. You violently, permanently threw away an entire family." Mark looked desperately at little Asher, who was now happily playing a few yards away directly alongside Elias. Elias was quietly, powerfully observing the entire scene from a highly respectful distance, completely ready to violently intervene if absolutely necessary. In that exact microsecond, Mark clearly, horrifyingly, saw absolutely everything he had maliciously thrown into the garbage. "I can absolutely fix this," Mark pathetically begged, his voice completely choked. His massive, arrogant pride violently shattered into a million jagged pieces We can legally be a real family again. I fiercely love you." Lauren observed him, and for the absolute first time in years, she felt absolutely zero pain, zero anger, just a strange, sad, pathetic pity for the incredibly small, broken man he truly was. She slowly, firmly shook her head. The absolute resolve in her beautiful eyes was exactly as hard as solid diamond. "You absolutely do not love me, Mark. You simply love the highly idealized concept of exactly what you lost. You ruthlessly abandoned me in the absolute darkest, most terrifying moment of my entire life, while I was physically carrying your innocent son." Her gaze slowly shifted to where Elias was standing, and a highly soft, beautiful smile gently touched her lips. Elias miraculously found me at absolute rock bottom. He truly saw me when I was completely, utterly invisible to the rest of the world. He aggressively lifted me up, and flawless showed me exactly what true, undeniable respect and pure love actually look like, without ever asking for a single damn thing in return. She turned back to Mark, her voice turning to pure ice. "For Asher's sake, we can remain highly civilized. He deserves to know his biological donor. But that is absolutely it. My heart, my true family, they already have a permanent home, and it is absolutely not with you." Mark finally, profoundly felt the massive, crushing weight of total defeat. He helplessly watched as Lauren confidently walked directly back to Elias, who securely wrapped his massive arms around her waist and pressed a highly tender kiss to the top of her head. Together, the three of them confidently walked away, a complete, fiercely unbreakable family, leaving Mark standing completely, utterly alone in the massive park, permanently surrounded by the horrifying, terrifying ghosts of his own toxic choices. Part 11. The Trials of Co-Parenting. Exactly one agonizing month after the brutal confrontation in the park, Mark Sterling was violently forced to confront his terrifying, new reality. Absolute access to his biological son, Asher, was entirely, 100%, at Lauren's strict discretion. And his own massive, toxic pride was a heavy burden she absolutely, fiercely refused to carry. The official visitation schedule was incredibly strict and highly rigid. A few heavily supervised hours every single Saturday morning at a highly public, secure children's center. During these visits, Lauren was absolutely always physically present, or sitting incredibly close by. This was absolutely not the beautiful, loving family Mark so desperately, pathetically craved. It was a highly sterile, heavily regulated, legally binding connection. The absolute greatest, most agonizing test for Mark wasn't massive amounts of money. It was sheer, brutal humility. The very first few visits were absolute, sheer torture. Mark would desperately bring massive, ridiculously expensive toys, a miniature motorized Tesla, a highly advanced drone, pathetic, transparent attempts to aggressively buy back the massive amount of lost time. Lauren calmly, firmly rejected absolutely all of them, explicitly citing the deep psychological need for healthy normalcy. Asher desperately needs educational books and emotional stability, Mark. He absolutely does not need massive, expensive compensation for your pathetic guilt, she stated flatly one morning, meticulously inspecting a massive stuffed bear Mark had brought for hidden, dangerous choking hazards. His massive rage violently boiled just beneath the surface. He was completely accustomed to aggressively commanding massive, billionaire boardrooms. He was absolutely not accustomed to being heavily supervised and strictly ordered around by the exact woman he had maliciously thrown away like trash. He desperately wanted to violently blame Elias Thorne, the quiet, terrifyingly powerful billionaire who now comfortably occupied the absolute center of his former life. But Elias remained incredibly, smartly invisible during these visits. His massive presence was a silent, terrifying, impenetrable shield, wrapped fiercely around Lauren and Asher. The absolute breaking point violently arrived when Mark horrifyingly discovered that little Asher happily called Elias Dad. Daddy Elias. A tiny, incredibly intimate detail that violently tore right through Mark's carefully, artificially controlled composure. During a highly supervised visit, Mark completely lost his mind. "I am your biological father, Asher. I am your actual blood," he aggressively insisted, violently grabbing the little boy's tiny arm way too incredibly hard. Asher, completely terrified by the sudden violence, immediately burst into hysterical, violent tears, instinctively, desperately reaching out for Lauren. Lauren's voice was exactly like absolute freezing ice. "That is enough! This visit is officially terminated." She aggressively snatched up the violently sobbing child, her eyes burning with a terrifying, deadly calm. "You arrogantly chose the simple, biological title of sperm donor, Mark. But the holy title of Dad is fiercely earned through years of absolute presence, brutal sacrifice, and pure love. You literally just violently lost absolutely all of your visitation rights for the entire next month. The massive consequences were absolutely instantaneous. Mark's frantic calls and desperate text messages to Lauren went completely, permanently unanswered. He violently faced the ultimate, absolute consequence: total, complete exclusion from his own son's entire life. An agonizing, suffocating loneliness that he had exclusively, maliciously created all by himself. Part 12. The Path of Acceptance. Faced with the terrifying, highly real threat of permanent, total exclusion, something finally, violently snapped deep inside Mark's soul. His massive, toxic arrogance finally broke. He absolutely did not call his elite, high-priced lawyers. Instead, he made a deeply humbling call to his absolute only remaining contact, a former, mid-level corporate colleague who had closely witnessed his massive, embarrassing downfall. He aggressively sought intense, professional psychotherapy, absolutely not to maliciously manipulate the legal system, but to genuinely, brutally confront the deeply rooted, toxic fear and massive sense of unearned entitlement that had completely destroyed his entire life. Exactly one agonizing month later, he tentatively contacted Lauren with exactly one single, highly humble, handwritten letter. "I was completely, utterly wrong. I deeply, profoundly apologize for my highly toxic behavior. I will strictly, absolutely respect your firm boundaries and your rules. I will absolutely not bring expensive gifts or aggressively pressure Asher. I will entirely focus solely on being a kind, safe, secondary uncle for the highly limited time you graciously allow me. I fully understand that I desperately need to earn your massive trust back, and I fully accept that it might take agonizing years." The very next Saturday, Mark arrived at the public center completely alone. He brought exactly one simple thing: a small, educational book about construction, a topic he knew Asher deeply loved. He spoke incredibly softly, focusing entirely, 100%, on the little boy's actual interests. He absolutely did not arrogantly mention the word Dad. He didn't ask highly toxic, probing questions about Elias. He was simply Mark, a quiet, safe, boring man reading a simple story. Lauren intensely watched him from a distance. Her sharp eyes were incredibly guarded, but highly observant. She clearly saw a genuine, massive shift. She actually saw a man brutally warring with the monster he used to be. The heavily supervised visit slowly, cautiously resumed. Asher, naturally incredibly forgiving as all children are, began to actually look forward to seeing Mark. He absolutely still fiercely called Elias Dad, but he slowly accepted Mark's simple, quiet presence. The highly tense dynamic gradually transitioned into a strained, highly cautious peace. Lauren kept her massive distance, focusing entirely on her brilliant corporate career and her beautiful family with Elias. Mark heavily accepted his brand new, highly minimal role. His quiet presence was a massive, physical testament to his painful, total acceptance. Part 13. Crossing the threshold. The highly cautious, peaceful routine finally established by the visitations allowed Lauren and Elias to finally, deeply turn their intense attention inward. For agonizing months, their profound, beautiful connection had been fiercely defined by a massive, shared goal: violently protecting Asher and aggressively building a stable, impenetrable future. They were an absolutely unbreakable, fierce team. But they were officially still sleeping in completely separate wings of the massive luxury penthouse. One quiet Saturday evening, right after a highly exhausting visit with Mark, little Asher had been securely put to bed and was sleeping incredibly peacefully. Lauren quietly found Elias in the massive, mahogany-paneled library, a deeply intimate space they rarely used for corporate work, strictly reserving it for profound, late-night conversations. Elias slowly looked up from his heavy book. His handsome expression was incredibly open, deeply patient, and fiercely loving. "He is finally asleep," Lauren whispered, leaning heavily against the wooden doorframe. "He genuinely seemed incredibly happy today," Elias observed, slowly closing his book. "Mark is finally, actually, learning." "Yes," Lauren agreed, her voice deeply exhausted. "But every single visit is still incredibly emotionally draining. It violently reminds me exactly how incredibly long I was fighting completely alone, and exactly how brutally hard I had to fight just to get here." Elias slowly stood up, confidently walking directly toward her. "You absolutely never have to fight alone, ever again, Lauren. Never. And you certainly do absolutely not have to fight me." He gently, highly reverently, took her soft hands in his. "We have aggressively built something incredibly real, something completely unbreakable, that successfully withstood a massive earthquake and a terrifying hurricane. We have fiercely proven that we are absolute life partners, in massive corporate commitments, and in terrifying chaos. But we still haven't actually given us a real chance." The massive unspoken question hung heavily, beautifully between them. Lauren knew exactly, profoundly what he was asking for. It absolutely wasn't about recklessly rushing. It was about finally, beautifully acknowledging their undeniable reality. "I fiercely love you, Elias," she confessed, the heavy words feeling both incredibly terrifying and massively liberating. "But I am so incredibly terrified of aggressively dragging the broken, toxic wreckage of my dark past into your beautiful future. I am terrified that I am only actually good at playing the role of the fierce, lone, isolated fighter." Elias smiled, a deeply warm, incredibly reassuring, and fiercely protective expression. "That exact fierce, lone fighter is the exact beautiful woman I violently fell in love with. And as for the broken wreckage, we will aggressively clean it up entirely together. That is exactly what true, absolute partnership is." He absolutely did not rush the highly intimate moment. He simply held her intense gaze in a beautiful, silent invitation. That exact night, for the absolute first time since they had moved into the massive new penthouse together, Lauren absolutely did not return to her separate, lonely room. She confidently, beautifully crossed the threshold directly into Elias's life, not out of desperate necessity, and absolutely not out of blinding fear, but out of pure, unadulterated choice, permanently sealing their massive bond with the absolute promise of a highly real, beautiful future, absolutely no longer defined by separate wings or horrific past betrayals. Part 14. The Quiet Proposal. Exactly 6 beautiful months later, their massive life had perfectly settled into a highly rhythmic, incredibly easy intimacy. Lauren absolutely thrived as the chief director of international relations, flawlessly balancing a highly demanding, multi-billion-dollar corporate career with a beautiful, peaceful family life. She and Elias functioned exactly as one single, unbreakable, terrifyingly powerful unit. Their shared, massive bed was the ultimate physical testament that they were finally, truly home. The absolute stability they had aggressively created was physically palpable, and it perfectly reflected in little Asher's incredibly joyful, highly confident, beautiful demeanor. Mark, quietly observing this massive, unbreakable peace from the outside, finally, truly accepted that the family he had maliciously thrown away was now a highly secure, untouchable fortress to which his son permanently belonged. On the exact day of Asher's 5th birthday, Elias absolutely did not plan a massive, highly public, flashy gesture. He patiently waited until they were completely alone in the tiny, quiet public park where they frequently walked with Asher. Asher was entirely absorbed in a highly energetic game of tag with a stray dog. Elias slowly turned to Lauren, who was watching her beautiful son with pure, unadulterated love. He absolutely did not pull out a massive, highly flashy, multi-million-dollar diamond ring. Instead, he slowly reached deep into his jacket pocket and pulled out a highly antique, incredibly simple silver locket. It was elegantly modest, beautifully tarnished, and incredibly worn. I completely know that we absolutely do not need a cheap piece of federal paper to officially be a real family, Elias said, his deep voice incredibly hoarse with pure, raw emotion. But this exact silver locket belonged directly to my late grandmother. She wore it every single day as a highly physical reminder that the absolute greatest, most priceless treasures in this entire life are the exact ones you aggressively, fiercely build with your own 2 hands. Absolutely not the ones you simply inherit. He slowly clicked it open. Inside, on exactly one side, was a tiny, beautiful photograph of little Asher. The complete other side was entirely empty. I desperately want you to permanently hold the absolute key to our massive future, Lauren. And I desperately want to spend the absolute rest of my entire life fiercely earning the ultimate right to permanently fill the other side of this locket with your beautiful picture. He looked directly into her soul. My beautiful, fierce woman. Will you formally marry me? Lauren's beautiful eyes instantly filled with hot tears, absolutely not of agonizing pain, but of overwhelming, pure, explosive joy. The exact woman who had been ruthlessly thrown into the garbage for possessing toxic baggage was being beautifully proposed to with the ultimate pure symbol of eternal family and absolute, unbreakable trust. Yes, Elias, 1,000 times yes. They celebrated incredibly quietly, just the 3 of them. Later that exact same year, the massive wedding, when it finally happened, was incredibly small, highly intimate, and beautifully held in the exact same quiet park where Elias had proposed, with little Asher serving as the incredibly proud, beaming ring-bearer. Epilogue. The final piece. Years rapidly, beautifully flew by. Lauren Thorne was universally known absolutely not just as a highly successful, terrifyingly powerful corporate executive, but as a massive visionary who actively introduced fierce ethical purpose back into the ruthless corporate world. Under her absolute brilliant leadership, her massive company became the ultimate global model for fierce social and environmental responsibility. Mark Sterling absolutely never fully regained his former, arrogant billionaire status, but he eventually found a highly modest, functional, simple life. His quiet visits with Asher became significantly less frequent as the boy grew, but infinitely more genuine, entirely focused on the young boy's absolute well-being. He had fully accepted his highly marginal role as the biological father, nothing more, nothing less, and was absolutely no longer a toxic threat to their massive peace. Asher, now a highly intelligent, incredibly strong young man, grew up deeply knowing exactly two absolute truths. He was fiercely, violently loved by the incredible parents who had actually raised him, Lauren and Elias, and he was the biological product of a massive, tragic past mistake by Mark, a mistake that had, highly ironically, directly led to the incredibly beautiful, untouchable, massive life he possessed right now. The family was completely, perfectly whole. The quiet, terrifying strength that had been brutally forged in the darkest shadows had absolutely not only resulted in a massive personal triumph, but it had successfully, aggressively, built a multi-billion-dollar empire entirely defined by absolute integrity and fierce, unconditional love. The woman who had once been maliciously told she was nothing more than a pathetic burden had miraculously, violently become the absolute, unbreakable foundation of absolutely everything that truly, genuinely mattered. What an incredibly satisfying, beautiful ending. Do you think Mark eventually redeemed himself, or did he just give up? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this explosive story of karma and true love, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And do absolutely not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next massive real-life story. Thanks for watching, and stay fierce.